Joss, do you want to just read the Victor Hugo quote that we just endlessly keep coming back to episode?
He said, moreover, teach those who are ignorant as many things as possible. Society is culpable in that it does not afford instruction gratis. It is responsible for the night which it produces. This soul is full of shadow. Sin is therein committed. The guilty one is not the person who has committed the sin, but the person who has created the shadow.
Socialist shelf. Be good goods and organize yourself. Socialist shelf. Be good goods and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf. It was either going to be that intro or me singing the parody of the Fortnite parody, the number one victory Royale. Yeah, Fortnite. We got to get down. We went with that one instead.
Hey, the
But yeah,
night's still young.
the night's still young. We are talking today about Battle Royale by Koushun Takami back on the island of Japan. Last week we had the crab cannery ship.
Well, again, it's nice to return to dystopia. I figured in keeping with the whole Japan theme, while Takiji Kobayashi is fresh in the mind, um, it might be fun to discuss a Japan that he certainly would not have recognized, that he would have struggled against Japan getting to that point. But also, as I'm thinking about dystopia, and perhaps I'm overcomplicating something that's really quite simple, but I like to think of this book as having an unreliable narrator also be the setting,
Uh-huh.
because so of course it takes place in a fictional Japan that we are given to understand won the Pacific War, kept on being its fascist dictatorship. Um, but did it win really? Did it fight America to a standstill? Does it occupy an ascendant sort of place in global geopolitics? That is up for debate, certainly. But that's not really what the book gets into, because the book, of course, is focused on keeping students in particular, at each other's throats, constantly fighting each other, enforcing a sort of zero-sum game within society to preclude organization entirely of the sort that Kobayashi would have striven to foster.
Yeah, it takes place in a state known as the Republic of Greater East Asia. Very 1984, pretty much directly out of that, the East Asia there. Um, Book takes place in 1997, which is the year in which it was written, 1996, 1997. But again, it's this alternate history. The United States exists. They call them the US imperialists, but it's a little unclear what's going on. We know there is the only real alternate history we know is something different happened in World War II. And we know Korea got like there was a southern dictatorship in Korea that got overthrown by the northern half of Korea.
Beyond
Um,
base.
yeah, that's like what we know, and they are enemies of Japan. That's like what we know about the world. And we also know that like America continued to produce at least some of its culture the exact same way because like Billy Joel and stuff like still came about. Like Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen still like was a thing. Um, so kind of interesting there that losing or standstilling in World War II had zero butterfly effect on the American music industry. Kind of
Mhm.
interesting there. But let's talk about this author, even though there's only so much to talk about because this is his only book. Um, his name, like I said, Koushun Takami. Um, Born 1969 in Amagasaki, Japan. And he was a student of literature. He's a student of literature at Asaku University. Tried to get a liberal arts degree at Nihon University and dropped out. Ended up becoming a journalist. Ended up becoming a journalist, was not, this like front page writer or anything like that. He was mostly doing behind the scenes stuff. His main thing he went over were police reports. While he did do some coverage of politics and economics, police reports were his main thing. I tried to find more of this, more of his work. I did not find a lot of it. Like I said, I think he was doing more on the research side of things, but
Mhm.
you can see that sort of like police reports, horrendous, you know, thing in this, like just reading horrible stories of things gone wrong.
Oh yeah. Well,
Um,
Wentz as well, his attention to detail re the weaponry, right?
mhm.
His
And
he
how
does
like
his
the body reacts to like
yes.
trauma.
Yes, yeah, he would have been adjacent to that sort of thing, certainly.
Absolutely. So this is his first and only novel to date that he has written.
And what a
Um,
debut novel, 600 pages of remarkably small print.
Yeah, 1996. He submitted it to the Japan Grand Prix Horror Novel Contest in 1997. And actually, like it was a favorite to win. People loved it. And then they were like, hey, this is horrifying. And also, there had just been a string of like child murders in Japan. And they were like, this seems in bad taste. So this is a horror novel competition, but like, come on, man.
Hmm.
So they cut
The
they
Junko
cut it.
Furuta case would still have been in I mean relatively fresh in the public memory.
Absolutely. But it gets published in 1999 anyway, immediately massively successful. Interestingly enough, and probably more famous is the movie because the movie Battle Royale comes out literally a year later. It's remarkable the turnaround. When I first like saw the years back to back, I was like, surely like there was some kind of like plan or whatever. But no, apparently they read the book and they're like, we gotta make a movie on this. And it was December of 2000 that the movie dropped. Um,
Hmm.
and I've actually still not seen the film. I will one of these days. We're not talking about the film. I think Joss has seen it, so he can speak more to it.
Yeah, I
Um,
just rewatched it on Saturday.
yeah, and the film is, very successful, interesting in its own right. And also the book then gets released in 2003 in the United States, an English translation, and it's been translated into over a dozen languages, incredibly successful, just massive success. The book got condemned officially by Japan's national diet, the legislature,
Hell yeah.
as did the film. It almost got banned in certain places. He then worked on the manga adaptation of this, which he actually says is he believes to be the superior version of the work. The manga adaptation is essentially the same plot. He feels the characters to be more fleshed out, and he spends more time with some characters we don't see a lot. Notably, the lighthouse. The characters in the lighthouse get a lot more focus in the manga. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
There's actually a sequel series to the manga that delves into their specific branch of the story in
yeah,
much more
but it,
detail.
it doesn't do like Battle Royale 2, right? While Battle Royale 2 exists and is a real movie that is, widely regarded as not particularly good, there is no official sequel. Takami said that he always intended to write another novel, and to date, he still says he is working on his second novel and has been for over 20 years. You don't see a lot of this guy. He is not an easy dude to track down. He's not very public, but anytime he pokes his head out and someone says, "Dude, what are you doing?" He says, "Working on the second novel." Now, if this is his first book and he just kind of dropped this, how long is a book he's been working on for, 20 some odd years? Who knows? What kind of situation is this? Is it going to be a masterpiece? Is it going to be a disaster? Is this guy a one-hit wonder?
Hmm.
No clue at all. But still pretty interesting. Notably, he says this book is based on a dream he had. He said he just woke up in a cold sweat, having dreamed his former middle school teacher told him to kill his classmates. He said he had also been reading Stephen King's The Long Walk, and watching a lot of pro wrestling. So he says it all just kind of came together in his head. Stephen King was asked about this book in 2004. He said he really liked it. Someone asked, do you think how do you feel about it, like pulling so much from The Long Walk? And then he said, he just straight up said, like, I don't care, fine by me. Like, I appreciate that I inspired this work.
Hmm.
I think it's one of the best books of the last like 10 years. Um,
Takami
So
also
yeah,
has had that sort of he's had that sort of candor in regards to the Hunger Games, which of course
yeah,
has gotten serious flack for essentially lifting the premise from Battle Royale. Now, of
yeah,
course, Suzanne,
much more directly than the
yes,
long walk thing.
and of course Suzanne Collins denies knowing about she denies having been aware of Battle Royale until she shipped the manuscript for Hunger Games. For what it's worth, like Takami says, well, people can come to the same conclusion in different places. He's not really pressed about it.
2014, there is a remaster of this book, basically in English, basically just the book in English is released. We read the 2003 version. I've read from multiple people that they prefer the 2003 version. I don't think the changes are all that significant. I did read some side by sides. It really does seem like some small tweaks. And I'm fine reading the version. I prefer to read the version that the majority of people who have read the book in English have read.
Yes.
This has been, and I will say there was the only other work I could find from Takami is a 2009 essay that he wrote about Battle Royale. In that essay, he says, I'm working on the second novel, as he tends to do. And he just talks a little about the legacy. Just, that's where he mentions thinking the manga is superior, some other stuff like that. Ultimately, not a lot to say about him as a guy, though I can say in the 90s, it is an interesting time for Japan. Japan is having this weird moment where, we've acknowledged it before. It's being seen as this potential rival of the West, despite being an ally of the West. We've since kind of passed that moment. Like, I don't think now people are really scared of Japan as this, like, despite its economy being quite powerful and a more, maybe a more robust economy to go into some sort of climate change future. I think due to the ascendancy of China and due to China and Japan's enmity and, everything that comes from that, I think like basically the US intelligentsia made the call like, hey, we can't really afford to be fear mongering about Japan right now. Notably, Japan also, though, goes through in the same period its own sort of economic crashes that come with these big booms. No longer being like it was back in the day, which is, more directly controlled, this direct protectorship or this direct, this direct government that's controlled either by a emperor or later on by a shogun or later on by like a military dictatorship backed up by the United States. It starts to go through that natural boom and bust cycle, which leads to some instability. It leads to a rise in the sort of, I'll call it left in Japan as more anarchist tendencies. I will say Takami said he did pull some from his like watching videos of anarchists fight with police. He said that was inspirational, some of the combat, some of the just like untrained combat, and then also how he saw these movements fail dramatically. And he said, well, what if it was a world where like we had completely decided that there is no resistance? And that's where he comes up with this. And aside from that, like, there is very little to say about this guy. And he has very little to say about himself. But I'll read a second book when it comes out,
Totally.
if it indeed does. He's not particularly old, 54 years old. He's got time to write this thing. But yeah, that's what I've got to say about Takami. But this book, massively popular, both the movie and the book. Obviously, the term battle royale comes from before it, but it really popularizes the term battle royale for an all-out battle. People think of the Hunger Games, but people also think of games like Fortnite, and basically every video game now is dropping a battle royale version. Battle royale is a very easy relative game to make, like multiplayer game to make. It is fun. And even this book opens with the concept of a battle royale that never really loops around. It just explains what a pro wrestling battle royale is.
Yes, yeah, and
And
I think
that's what it is.
I think I was struggling a little bit with what to make about what to make of the introduction, right? Which
Yeah.
is it's from the perspective of so the subhead here is Introduction, a pro wrestling fan's rant in an alternate world, right? So we're in this Republic of Greater East Asia now, right?
Yeah.
But it's similar, to a wrestling spectacle that we would see in our world, right? This guy's like, I'll read a little bit from what he says. What? Battle Royale? What's a Battle Royale? Come on, don't tell me you don't know that. Why bother coming to a pro wrestling card then, huh? The name of a move? The name of a tournament? No, a Battle Royale is a pro wrestling match. And, he goes on in that
And it
vein.
never shows up again. Like, there is no more
Right,
pro wrestling in this.
right. Right. You know,
Obviously, it's explaining the concept, and he's doing an analogy here between like what a pro wrestling battle royale would be, and if you forced humans to kill each other in an arena. But it is interesting that you don't see the wrestler or whatever at any point.
right. It's from the perspective of this guy who is invested in the event, invested in the sport, the spectacle.
Yeah.
He digresses frequently to cheer on the people who are fighting, right? He lists off characters that he really likes that he would love to see fight.
Mm.
And, he doesn't interrogate why he watches it. He just describes to you its contours, right? He memorizes the characters in the sport, as you have to memorize the students in this book. You really don't. Two of them die
There's
right
a
away.
few of them
Yeah,
you have to memorize.
right.
It gives you the list of names. Actually, the opening is interesting in general because you have the list of third year class B from this junior high school, all 42 of them. Notably, you said this is our 42nd episode, right?
Yes, correct.
Spooky, spooky. You also have a few quotes which are interesting. First, you have him saying, "I dedicate this to everyone I love, even though it might not be appreciated." That's funny. But then you've got a few quotes. The first one is from third year class B. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it says the quote is, "A student is not a tangerine." And then Bruce Springsteen's "Born to Run," which will get referenced in the novel. "But tramps like us, baby, we're born to run." And then from the song "It's So Hard to Love," the quote, "It's so hard to love." And then finally from George Orwell's "Homage to Catalonia," and this is longer. "During all those last weeks I spent there was a peculiar evil feeling in the air, an atmosphere of suspicion, fear, uncertainty, and veiled hatred. You seemed to spend all your time holding whispered conversations in corners of cafes and wondering whether that person at the next table was a police spy. I do not know if I can bring home to you how deeply that action touched me. It sounds a small thing, but it was not. You have got to realize what was the feeling of that time, the horrible atmosphere of suspicion and hatred." And notably, that's from Homage to Catalonia, which is George Orwell talking about his time spent in Spain during the Spanish Civil War in the
Mhm.
1930s.
Yeah, yeah, and you can really, I mean, that is the atmosphere that you were going into this with, right?
Yeah.
Not only is there this spectacle, right? Not only is there this zero-sum game of violence that makes it indeed hard to love, hard to team up with people, hard to put your trust in somebody, right? Hard to organize against the dynamic that you find yourselves within, right? Because that's all there is the other part of this, right? There is a sense not only of danger, not only of imminent violence, but of stagnation, right? So you were trapped in this game and you had to see it through to the end. I mean, it's worth noting, and I don't know how deeply we can get into it. I can't really speak on it intelligently, but I mean, we are at this time historically in the middle of Japan's lost decade, right? The economic miracle of the 80s had just ended. They're in the middle of their Great Recession. So, and of course, the Soviet Union has collapsed, right? So we're at essentially the end of history, right? So there's a sense of, well, what now? Where do we go? Are we circling the drain here?
And notably, I think these quotes also summarize quite well the tone of this novel because you have this very serious quote from Orwell about this very serious time of history of this ascendant fascism. And then you have
Yes.
these other quotes like Bruce Springsteen, like and no offense to no offense to Bruce Springsteen, no offense to just saying "it's so hard to love" from "it's so hard to love" and "a student is not a tangerine." Like this kind of like wacky feel to it, which is, this book walks because this is don't mistake. This was submitted to a horror contest because this is a horror book. This is a gore book in the
Mhm.
style of like what was that movie we watched, Tokyo Gore Police or something like that.
Yes,
In
Tokyo Gore
many
Police.
way, this is a gore novel, but unlike something like Tokyo Gore Police, it does deal with the implications of its absolutely horrifying violence. In a way that, there's most gore films and stuff like that in mangas or whatever are not sitting there like making you steep in the blood in some kind of like, introspective way. This book is deeply introspective. It's deeply
Mhm.
horrifying. It's nightmarish. It's explaining why the killers are killers, right down to medical conditions and sexual assault they experienced as a child. But it does spend time like dancing in the blood very much. Like
Yes.
it spends time like talking about students' eyeballs being popping out and stuff. And like it is, I would say, having fun with the gore as well. And
Mhm.
like these things coexist, which makes me understand why there were people like, I mean, I don't agree, but I can understand why people were uncomfortable with this book. Why some people were like, what the hell is this guy? What is he saying? What is he doing? Because this isn't a, I mean, it is a condemnation of the violence, but it is like spending time having fun with the violence too.
Mhm.
It's an interesting line to walk. Um, and I want to say it's, you know, in some ways, just like probably a more honest version of what like a lot of people do with their work. Like a lot of people who are condemning violence want to pretend like they aren't having some fun with the violence. And a lot of people who are making hyper violent work want to act like they don't have some knowledge of the sort of implications of that violence, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think he's like walking an interesting line here. I don't know if it
Yes.
always lands, but and I'll say again, this is a translation, so any kind of anytime there's like tone where I'm like, what? It may read perfectly in the original language. I don't know.
Mhm.
But we can only speak to what we have, right?
There is a certain, yeah, there is a certain absurdity um in a sort of hyper violent setting, right? Where, whether you're consciously looking for it or not, right? Something comes to you and you have no choice but to laugh, right?
Yeah.
It's this is this I don't know how tasteful this is, but I saw a tweet the other day from a Palestinian soccer fan, right?
Hmm.
Who, the internet was turned off in Gaza, but then it came back on, and he tweeted out, "Oh man, Barcelona gave up 2 goals to whoever else. Man, turn the internet back off." Like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I mean, it's you look for stuff like that is completely inconsequential, that is completely out of pocket, because it's something to look at that isn't insane, right?
Right.
There is that.
Yeah.
There is also there
Mm.
is a time and place for that where it's easier, right? It's pretty blackly funny how long it took to get a release here in the States, the film did, right?
Like a
And how
decade, right?
about a decade, yeah, and then it was direct to DVD, right? Well, it was at film festivals before that, but like not a wide release, right?
Right.
And the timing of it was the problem, right? That's the thing, right? Toei had the rights to it, and it wasn't that no American company would touch it in the wake of Columbine, but Toei just didn't want to deal with the uproar. So they
Mm.
wouldn't sell it to anybody for a while. And then in '06, '07 or so, there was talk of making an American version. What happened around that time? Virginia Tech, right?
Yeah.
So, very difficult thing to sell to
Also,
people.
like, what year does Hunger Games come out? I do wonder
Uh,
that because
2000, let me see.
one wonders, I mean, the Hunger Games, what, 2012?
The
2012 is the movie.
Yeah, the first,
2008 is the
yeah.
book.
Mhm.
So I wonder if that also had any influence on like anyone's decision making around things. Uh, and like, it's hard to talk about this book without thinking about the Hunger Games, just from my perspective, because I had never read this book till now.
Mhm.
I'd certainly read the Hunger Games both when they came out, around when they came out, and afterwards. Probably read the series twice. Certainly seen the movies. Obviously, you didn't dodge them if you lived in the States. Um, and like, I gotta say, my main takeaway about this book and the Hunger Games is I said it on Twitter. There were some people who got mad, right? And because in Mockingjay Part One, there is music. There's really, it's one of the only good scenes in Mockingjay Part One. You have Katniss sings the song. It's very beautiful. We all remember it. Or you come into the tree.
Where,
And
where,
someone
where it gets to the attack on the dam, right?
right, and they
That's a brilliant scene,
re-released it.
yeah.
Yeah, weirdly good scene in a
Mhm.
very dry movie. And they re-released it as a pop version, and it actually was on the top 40 for a while. And a lot of people were like, "That's like what the Capitol would do with that song." True. This book feels to like Hunger Games to this book feels a little bit like the pop version of like this book. Like, not that Hunger Games is completely sanitized, but I think Hunger Games in a certain way that feels like a much more sanitized, much more like palatable version of Battle Royale. I don't know if
Yeah.
you feel like that or not. And I'm not even like shitting on Hunger Games. I'm not
Mhm.
like here to say whether I have trouble believing Suzanne Collins did not read this book or was not somehow influenced by it. There are some things that are so direct, but at the same
Mhm.
time, maybe maybe there is maybe there's some kind of, not to pull some Jungian psychology, but maybe there are symbols that exist out in the idea space that multiple people pull from that recur cyclically. Or maybe, she read about it on a blog and forgot, and then she incorporated some ideas. It's fine to like reuse ideas.
That's what Detective Stone was reading about, right? He read, assuming they had Battle Royale in fucking the V for Vendetta verse, right?
It's like
He
all
read
they
that, and then he
read.
read Young to comprehend it, right? I
It's
mean,
Battle Royale, but like, yeah, the teacher is the good guy.
yeah. Oh God, yeah. We'll get into the teacher. I do want to touch on one more thing about the spectacle, right?
Yeah.
Because the intro ends with, this wrestling fan lists off all these characters in the wrestling scene, right? And he's like, "What? How can you not know any of them? Did you really come here to watch pro wrestling?" Right? And to my mind, what this is, I mean, part of the book, right, as you say, is delving into what makes people killers, whether it's past trauma or
Mm,
a lack of empathy, like just a pathological lack of empathy, or just the demands of the moment driving somebody to some sort of desperate and scared horizon, right? It is, I think, and this is what the introduction I think is preparing us for. Um, Something that only makes sense to you if you are there participating in it.
right.
There is also, to touch on the movie briefly, so the movie opens with Dies Irae from the Verdi Requiem Mass, which banger of a piece, and given its ubiquity as this like ominous Latin piece of music, I think puts you in kind of a similar frame of mind as the book's intro. It has you expect this spectacle. Um, the effect is sort of blunted for me personally because Verdi's Dies Irae also plays on the title screen of Harry Potter Quidditch World Cup for the game. So,
That's
that's
awesome.
that's what I think of, right? When I boot up Battle Royale, I'm thinking of, the fucking Sweetwater All-Stars and the Stars and
Look,
Stripes,
if
like,
realistically, if Quidditch were realistically played, it would have a similar kill count to Battle Royale.
I mean, there was that other like that Crayothson or however you pronounce that like Gaelic name, that other wizarding sport in Quidditch Through the Ages, where you fly around catching stones in a cauldron on your head, and that what was that song? What was that song like 10 of the 12 men team were fated to die or whatever. I these are like core memories that we're unlocking here that we won't get
Deep,
into.
deep
Um
memories. But yeah, let me give you I think, if you know the term Battle Royale, you can kind of guess what's going on here. 42 children. They are 15, 14 to 16 years old in range, are put onto an island or some other place, and only one leads. That's it. They are each given a pack with some water, some food, and a random weapon. They are given a map, and there are zones every 6 hours that become not allowed for them to go. And if they do go on to those zones, they blow up. It forces them closer and closer together. And basically, every 6 hours, they announce who's dead, and it ends with one emerging. And unlike the Hunger Games, because I know you're thinking that sounds very much like the Hunger Games, and it is. What is different is this is not a televised event. This is not an event that everybody sits around and watches. It is sold to the populace um, as basically a military experiment, is a necessary military exercise. They know very little about it. Let's call it the program. All they see is the child who emerges at the end, and they make a big deal. They say it was here. They give the numbers of each kid who died and how they died. It is not shown, it is described to them. You see this kid, and you're told this kid is now going to live in, relative luxury, but relative comfort for the rest of their lives. That's it. And you're just aware that this happens, and it happens to some junior high students every single year. And that's it. It is not a spectacle. The only people who are monitoring it are the people monitoring the games and a handful of like very rich people who bet on it. We find out, but even they are not watching like film of it. They get like audio from the callers, and they get like little beeping dots of light on the island. And they just like are making bets based on like what they know about the students, and that's
Hmm.
essentially it. Which is a big difference. There is not like a Caesar Flickerman here who's like announcing these people. There is
The
no attempt to put a sheen on it.
the closest you get to that, and the contours of this change, right? Because I believe in the manga, it's supposed to be a really like terrible reality show.
Yeah.
But in the book and the film, it's not. The closest you do get to a Caesar Flickerman figure is in the film, where the teacher character, there's a quote unquote teacher character who's running the game on the island, right? That
Yeah,
character in the film,
Sakamochi, right?
yeah, Sakamochi, and we'll get into the why of his name. That character in the film is played by Takeshi Kitano, or
Hmm.
Beat Takeshi, who's a very famous comedian, television presenter in
Yeah.
Japan. So there's that extra element, though it's not a reality show in the film. There's the extra element of spectacle, right, of presentation
Yeah.
to the public as this annual event that you can kind of follow.
Yeah,
Um,
Sakamochi in the book is very much just like he is like that, but he's kind of just doing it for himself.
yes, yes,
Um,
and
like he's
here's
kind
what.
of doing a bit. Like he knows the only people who will see this are a few soldiers and students who are about to die.
Mhm.
He's just, I don't know, call him a psychopath, call him what you want, but he's having fun with his victims. He is just doing the serial killer taunting the people about to die thing
Yes.
here.
And here's where we get into some stuff that doesn't translate, because so his name is Kinpatsu Sakamochi. His name is a bastardization, kind of a swapping around of syllables of Kinpachi Sakamoto, who's the
Hmm.
main character of this series called Kinpachi Sensei. In English, it's Mr. Kinpachi in Class 3B, just like Battle Royale has Class 3B. So this show ran from 79 to 2011. It was a cultural touchstone. The finale was like 4 hours long. And the Kinpachi Sakamoto character is a teacher who helps his students with their problems. This guy in the book is a problem.
Yeah.
And also, because everybody is weirded out by the name, like because the internal monologue of the protagonist is like, what is this, a joke? We know that the show exists in this world, which is weird to
Hmm.
me.
He is something of a troll in this world. He does a little trolling. Let's introduce some of the other characters. We got our main guy. And just apologies. I don't speak Japanese. I'm doing my best, y'all. We got Shuya. Shuya is our main guy. He is, and I'm just going to tell you right now, this book falls into, and actually the author has acknowledged this, into the stereotype, like just kind of every character being a lot of characters being very similar, and a lot of characters just being kind of good at everything.
Hmm.
Shuya's thing is like, yeah, he's an orphan. His parents were killed in kind of a mysterious quote unquote accident. They did anti-government stuff. It never really gets into it. And he is a rock star. He's into American music, which is banned, and like hence him quoting Bruce Springsteen, quoting Billy Joel, which, I joked about it earlier. No butterfly effect. These guys still became popular and wrote the exact same songs. Kind of funny. Um,
Joan Baez, she's mentioned in
yeah,
chapter one, presumably
he
still writing liberal protest music.
exactly. He is, and also he's a very talented athlete, both at basketball and baseball. Very talented shortstop, so good that he's legendary at other schools. He's supposed to be handsome. The girls like him, whatever, but they're like, he's a little bit of a playboy, but we like him or whatever. He's popular, he's funny, and he and his class are on a field trip on this bus that will end up getting hit with sleeping gas. With him are, some other people. I wrote down like, look, there's 42 kids in this. You don't need to know all of them. I'm going to go over a few of them though. You've got Shuya, um, Shinji, basically his good friend, another just super athlete, also a
Shinji
hacker,
Nomura, the third man, they call him.
the third man, a hacker, talented. You've got Noriko. She's this quiet, kind of reserved girl who teams up with them. Basically his good friend who gets murked has a crush on her, so Shuya feels an obligation to take care of her. It goes on. There's Shogo Kawada, who's a student who's a year behind, so he's older. He seems dangerous. He's all scarred up.
Best
Um,
character.
you have Kazuo, the perfect kid. He's rich, he's strong, he's smart, he's a thug. He wears it constantly describes him as wearing his jacket basically like this trench coat. He's gonna be like basically the main antagonist. You've got Mitsuko, this beautiful gang leader, this female gang leader who's been through just like horrifying sexual and physical abuse. And she's just like a complete psycho who is like also this other kind of figure of pure chaos. Um, you know, Yeah, and then there's like it goes on. There's like you'll have this like handful of characters. They come in and out. Some people are kind of contenders, some people aren't. But your main dangers though are going to be obviously Kazuo and Mitsuko. Um, but yeah, it's kind of odd, like the number of characters that are thrown at you. I'd say about a fifth of this book is perspective of a character introduced, character gets murked by Mitsuko or Kazuo. Like that is like a good fifth of this book of like a person is going to die. And you kind of know it from the get-go. I want to quote the dictator's April speech though, because they
Yes.
get introduced to the program by being drugged by this gas. They wake up in a classroom, sort of with Sakamochi at the front, and he reads from the dictator's April speech, the dictator being the head of the country. And it says, quote, "The number 68 program experiment," that's in reference to this event, "is absolutely necessary for our nation. Of course, I grieve at the thought of thousands, tens of thousands of youths losing their lives at the ripe age of 15. But if their lives serve to protect our people's independence, can we not claim then that the flesh and blood they shed shall merge with our beautiful soil, passed down to us by our gods, and live with us in eternity?" It goes on like that. Basically, they're making this pitch that this is incredibly necessary, and then it is revealed 50 such classes go through this every 2 years. There are almost 2,000 kids who die like this. This is an insane, like the number is like 1 in like 680 that you'll get
Mhm.
chosen, which is obviously low odds, but 1 in 680 is a fuck ton though to
Oh
get
yeah.
killed. And it is
Like
just like a harvest of children, and he does
yeah, I
refer to them
mean,
as ripe.
yeah, if you think about, the United States having roughly thrice the population of Japan, right? You think about how that would scale up. It is almost certain that you will either know somebody who's been through the program or, go through it yourself, right?
But it,
And
notably, that's like intentional, right? That's it is revealed that that's the government's intent. Am I right?
yes, 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 it is. The military motive is kind of a gloss on Sakamochi explains it very, very late in the book toward the end, right? The gloss on the real goal, which is essentially this, strategy of tension, right?
Yeah.
To repeatedly traumatize the student body, to repeatedly traumatize people in in their youth, right? To grow up and not trust anybody, I mean, it's a psychological scar on. I mean, Vincent Bevins talks about this sort of thing in Jakarta Method, right? He had trouble until he himself learned Bahasa Indonesia and like could talk to people directly. He had trouble getting Indonesian translators to communicate with Indonesian people he interviewed because of that psychological scar of, oh, there was this huge massacre and like this random white guy is more trustworthy to me than, this guy from down the road.
And notably, it is, it's obviously that terror of just the massacre, but is also reminding the population there are people willing to kill among you.
Yes.
A
Yes.
lot of people willing to kill. And basically reminding everyone, no matter what, we can get people to kill. We can get any group of people to turn on each other and kill them. And so that is it's literally attacking solidarity is what it's doing. Because this book
Mhm.
makes the point several times, a little clumsily, but it makes the point that if everybody spoke out, if everybody got together, we could overthrow this government. It even says, what if everyone held the same opinion? It wouldn't matter under this government because no one is willing to share it with one another. We know there is a lot of political repression. We know parents who are mad that their kid has been taken get dropped. And apparently when like a teacher even speaks out, the teacher dies. When the head of the orphanage speaks out, apparently, I don't know if he's lying or not, but Sakamochi says he sexually assaults this teacher. Knowing this guy, he could also be making it up. It's unclear, but like that's the mindset. Like the government is in some ways all powerful, but notably, even government officials' children, the rich people's children, all of that are entered into this tournament, this idea
Mhm.
of pure equality.
It scales down the strategy of tension to the classroom itself. The first thing that the students are shown is the corpse of their teacher, described in vivid detail, right? They bring out a body bag to the front, the soldiers do, and they open it up. There's the teacher, his and his head is pulped.
Yeah, and yeah, Yoshitoko then also a good close friend of Shuya. Um, he's dead immediately. It's a massive rug pull. Yoshitoko is kind of set up to be the right-hand man along with Shinji, and just boom, dead. Another girl who doesn't really matter dies too. Yoshitoko, notably, is Noriko's like sort of like he kind of has a crush on Noriko, and it makes Shuya feel this loyalty to her. But it is this like brutal scene where he dies, and then like they're all about to freak out, and like he's actually very willing to kill more people, and like one student freaks out and gets a knife thrown through her skull, and it's a very horrifying opening. And then the teacher Sakamochi is just like, all right, um time to take off. You'll get like a minute between, each of you get to take off. It's like, wait a minute, the next person goes. And Shuya's like, all right, I'm gonna get everyone to team together. He walks outside, and some kid's on the roof just shooting crossbow bolts at everyone who walks out.
This was funny because I was watching Battle Royale, as I said, on Saturday with some friends of mine, and my buddy was like, wait, why doesn't somebody just spawn camp? And I'm like, that's a very good question.
Uh-huh. Does he not in the movie?
No, he does. He does.
Oh, he just did immediately, yeah.
There's a lot of similarities in the film to the book. There's a few different things. Like Shuya starts out with an army knife in the book,
Yeah,
and
it's fine.
and a pot lid in the film. Noriko gets boomerang in the book. I don't remember what she has in the film, but it's worse than a boomerang even.
But it says, of course, killing your classmates was wrong. And besides, once this game time had expired, they were all going to die anyway. So it might have been absurd to fight at all, but that was just too rational. The fact was that Yoshio simply did not want to die. He was petrified by any of his classmates who'd bare their teeth at him. Just think about it. You're surrounded by a swarm of assassins. And so his choice to reduce the enemy as efficiently as possible wasn't motivated by rational thoughts, but instead from a deeper primal fear of death. There was no need to discern your allies from your enemies. Everyone had to be an enemy. After all, when, I have trouble saying this name, used to pick on him, everyone looked the other way. And this is something that is very notable in the book. Of every single kill that is carried out by anyone other than Mitsuko and Kazuo is rationalized to
Yes.
some capacity. It's like, was that a good kill or a bad kill? Was that a okay murder to do? Because was that self-defense, or was that, if not self-defense, then like reasonable, you had a reasonable doubt that this person was going to attack? People are like, every single time they know a student killed another student, they're like, well, do you think it was an okay kill, or is he playing the game? The
Mhm.
thing is, at a certain point, you're kind of playing the game, like, and
Oh
that's kind
yeah.
of the point. Shuya's playing the game, whether he says he was or not. He puts an axe through a guy's skull in the first 2 hours. Like, he
Hmm.
can say he's not playing the
Accidentally.
game. Yeah, no, accidentally, but like he's in the game. Like,
Right.
that's kind of like the contradiction of it. And the only two characters who are just like, no, like I'm completely out of this are Kazuo, this just dramatic rich kid who's again good at everything and dark, and it says he has a splinter in his brain that calls him to be a psychopath, and has a very cool villain intro where his like former goon like comes up to him and he gets dropped, and all his former goons are around him just bloody. And Mitsuko, who is the victim of abuse, who basically uses her like charm and just her natural strength to just be like, no, I'm just this poor girl. And then she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Slices your throat, or seduces someone and slices their throat. Master of deception.
Yeah.
Um, those are the only two who feel no
Hashtag justice for
remorse.
Mitsuko.
Yeah, justice for Mitsuko. She went through some bad shit. Unfortunately, it got taken out on some other kids. But at the end of the day, what can you do?
Yeah.
We stand a queen. No, just kidding.
No, and you do make a very good point about how quickly it gets rationalized, and how quickly that, again, you have Yoshio's rationalization of his kill, that everybody
Yeah,
around him could be an assassin, and then based on that, immediately after, right, chapter 9, Kazushi Niida drops him and is like, well, given the circumstances, he had no other choice but to kill Yoshio.
right.
Yoshio Akamatsu had obviously killed Mayumi Tendo, so Kazushi hadn't done anything wrong. Kazushi was very good at making excuses. Once he justified his action, the numbness in his head began to wane. Now, of course, Kazushi, he'll come back and he'll do a lot more than murder,
Sure.
as we'll see. He's just that kind of guy.
Hmm.
But again, well, that's part of what the that's part of what the game is trying to inculcate, right? The idea that, well, some people are just that kind of guy.
Hmm. Um, Shuya, meanwhile, gets Noriko, who got injured in the classroom with a sort of it's not a terribly bad bullet wound, but she gets like her leg grazed by a bullet. They run off together. It is funny, you get the occasional reminder that these kids are middle schoolers just with their thoughts. They're very random, like interjectory thoughts. For example, like Shuya is like trying to help Noriko recover, and he like gets nervous to go through her bag that she just got assigned to her because he's like, I can't go through a girl's things.
There
Like
is,
it's very funny, but it is like, kind of true to life.
yeah.
These kids are nervous as hell.
Yeah, there is that sort of like nervousness around and curiosity around girls that you're just starting to shake off at this age, right? That I
Yeah.
find very funny. Like early on, you get Shuya thinking to himself, well, Mitsuko Soma was a girl. There was no way she would play this game. And
Yeah.
this is right after a flashback, by the way, to a post-mortem of a previous program that Shuya's seen on the news, where
Where
here
her
we go.
girl very much wins.
Yeah, girl very much wins. Sakamochi has just said, yeah, half the winners have been girls, so
Yeah.
everybody's got a shot.
Mm. You know, um, and then I would be remiss. I already mentioned Kazuo's dramatic villain introduction, but I forgot. He literally says before he kills like his former goon, he says, I sometimes lose track of what's right and wrong. I flipped a coin, play the game or don't. I decided either is good as either, or like whatever. He says something like along those lines. And he's standing there like trench coat down, blood around his knees. Just got this machine gun that, like, I repeat, will never run out of bullets. No,
He's literally a school shooter. He's Japanese
yeah,
Eric Harris.
but he is also like the child of the richest guy, and also he's good at everything. Like it says, he like picked up art, drew a perfect painting, made a perfect painting, and then threw it away. He got into violin, became a master of violin, and then threw the violin away. Like he's just got a splinter in his brain that makes him not know right from wrong, and feel nothing. And another example of just kind of these characters can be kind of like that.
Mhm.
You'll have that, or you'll have Shinji, like, oh, the perfect athlete who's also super attractive and can hack the Japanese government, like with a like Mac he found in the dirt.
I
Um, you
love
know,
how
it's fun, yeah.
I love how excited Shinji gets when he was like, "Oh my God, I found a Power Book 150."
Yeah, it's
You
it's
know,
very 90s too. It's very Hacker Man, like,
I
uh,
it is interesting to me. So first of all, we have skipped over one rule that I wanted to go back to.
oh yeah, yeah. Got
So
the 24-hour rule.
yeah, that's exactly it. Basically, so everybody's got these, collars that they wear that'll explode if you go into a forbidden zone or whatever. But if 24 hours pass by without anybody dying, then everybody dies, right? Everybody
Hmm.
blows up. So, literally, you have to kill in order
This isn't,
to.
yeah, this isn't like the Hunger Games where like you can blackmail President Snow by saying we'll both die. He'll be like, okay, I'm dropping an atom bomb on your location in this.
Yes.
Like, there's so many students who go through this, and this is not being monitored beyond just like a few rich freaks. They do not care. The Katniss and Peeta analog in this, the star-crossed lovers, just kill themselves at the beginning of the game. They
Oh,
jump off a
yeah.
cliff hand in hand. That this is not the same in that regard. This
Yeah,
is not a game.
I like that it kind of puts that sort of plot to bed,
Hmm.
right away. I do think that and the other thing is, of course, each kid only has 1 liter of water, right? So you're
Yeah.
expected to forage, you're expected to kill, within the 3 days or so that the game lasts, right?
Notably, it's
Because
not difficult to forage because this is a town that, like, until like 12 hours ago, there were
oh,
people in,
it's just been eminent domain. Yeah,
including like
exactly.
cars that you can drive.
I,
Um,
well, if you're smart enough like Shinji is or Kazuo is to hotwire it.
yeah, but like they're like not, uh, I'm just mean in the sense of like, they have not, scraped this place completely clean. There are computers, there are cars. Also, notably their weaponry, massively, massively different. We talked about it earlier. Some people are given machine guns. One guy's given a fork. Um, Noriko is given a boomerang, like a classic, like hunting boomerang. One
Mhm.
guy is given body armor. It's massively different. There's several guns in play, knives, but like,
Yeah,
one
the
can
joke
imagine being annoyed, like pulling out a fork and the guy next to you has an Uzi.
Yeah, the joke weapons or the non-weapons are very interesting to me, right? Because again, you get the body armor that goes through a couple of owners. You also get this one kid, Hiroki, gets a
Hmm.
radar detector, right? So he can figure out where people are, but he can't fight necessarily. Um,
Hiroki, but he is a karate master, and
yes,
he carries around a stick and is like the only guy who's able to go toe to toe with Kazuo, basically.
dude, he fucking mains Keelik in Soul Calibur too, man. He keeps them at bay.
Who are, let's play Caesar Flickerman here. Who are the contenders in this competition? Who are the people who really have a chance? It's like Hiroki, basically, Shinji, Mitsuko, Kazuo, and then like Shuya's team. I would say are the real people who have like a chance to win this thing.
Yeah, just
Sh
by virtue of them like glomming onto Shogo
Shogo.
Kawada
And
right
let's talk
away.
about Shogo because what's his deal? You wanna tell us
He's
about Shogo, Joss?
Yeah, in the movie he's
Best
a
character
transfer.
easy, right?
Yes, yeah, in the
Yeah.
movie he's a transfer student, but in the book, he's kind of an everyman, Like the movie nails this really well, right? Because he has this running joke where, oh, my father was a chef. Oh, my father was a doctor. Oh, my father
Hmm.
was a fisherman, so I know how to pilot this boat, right? But I mean, in the book, he is good with weapons. He knows how to, drive cars really well. He's a good defensive driver, right? He's good at survival. He can cook. He
He's
knows
also a little
medicine.
older, so he was held back a year, so he's like
Yes.
growing out the stubble. He's stronger. He's got that 15 and 16. You grow a lot between
Yeah.
those years.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, excellent casting job because he and Kazuo in the film are 25. They're the oldest.
No,
They're the
that's
oldest. They're the oldest actors of the group.
mm,
But it transpires that Shogo has been in the program before.
God, I felt so bad for this man.
Oh
Uh,
God. Yeah, he's been in the program before, and by sheer chance, he's been picked again.
mhm.
It's possible.
I have questions about this. So, notably, you have multiple characters. Shuya, Yoshitoko, obviously Shogo, who have connections to people, um, family who were known dissidents against the country. Um, and you have other characters that maybe the government would be interested in getting rid of. Think about Mitsuko. If the government's like vaguely aware of her and what she's doing, and the fact that she's helping other students prostitute themselves, it makes that point. There are multiple women who have well, I say women, girls who have like prostituted themselves in this class. You
Mhm.
have in this class, you have somebody like Kazuo, who is like a known sociopath that is like diagnosed. You have this like rich kid who is this annoying second child of this one guy who controls food that the government might want to discipline. Is there a world in which the government finds it convenient to make sure these students end up in the same class and offs them a la, I don't know, catching fire, the like doing the sort of second Hunger Games to like purge your enemies. It's a
Mhm.
thought that crossed my mind that never gets addressed because the government is, aside from like Sakamochi, pretty much disembodied and removed. It is kind of a fact of life that you can like rage against, but it's very much like raging against a mountain. But one wonders, especially when it comes to Shogo.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's interesting, right? Because the book, there's another intro to the book that is basically a transcript of this. It's incident report that, oh, somebody hacked the government, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
got away with this information about the upcoming program, right? And we don't know who did it, but somebody did, right? And it transpires toward the end that Shogo was caught, right? There was a failsafe that was able to track his efforts. So one wonders, okay, well, perhaps yeah, this was the government's way of sort of offing him. But in that case, why wouldn't they just like come and kill him, right?
Because
This
he
is
was, well, that's true.
this is a government that
Hmm.
is not above just coming and like assassinating your parents if they've been informed that you're in the program and they raise their voices against it, right?
That's
It's a
true.
very it's what Shogo calls successful fascism,
Hmm.
but how successful the Republic of Greater East Asia does get called into question at several points throughout the book. As we early on, of course, it's mentioned that the current great dictator is the 317th guy.
Yeah,
Which,
immediately you have questions.
yes, yes, because
Now, yeah.
if it's if we are to assume that the Republic has been around for like 50 years, you're looking at 6 or 7 of these guys a year, right? But it's addressed in
That is also funny to
mhm.
imagine, though.
It
Like,
is.
I think the dictator, and I mean, like, it's not official, but show goes, like, I think it's a Big Brother situation.
Yes.
Does it really matter? He's a concept, he's a guy. Um, Between like East Asia and like, the dictator and certain stuff, there's definitely like some 1984 vibes here. It's impossible when you're writing dystopia not to like have that in your skull a little bit. Also, he directly references Orwell. The guy's read 1984.
Mhm.
It is kind of taking it as a fact that this is the most successful country in the world per capita, like in industry and stuff. That said, we have good reason to assume that the standards of living are relatively high. Like when you have people reflecting on their lives and stuff like that, like there is economic inequality, certainly. There are companies. There is talk of like, oh, this guy's going to inherit the company. I'm going to go do this. There is talk of class. There are clearly people who need money because like there is Mitsuko who says like, well, my mom was prostituting me and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So clearly that exists, but there does seem to be like some like it seems to be a developed country, to a certain extent. And it is obviously a self-contained economy that is continuing to perpetuate itself. Um, Despite that, and then like we don't know about America. They're calling America imperialist. We don't know what's the deal with America. We know there is a presumably socialist Korea. I think that's the implication of there being a North Korea that's their enemy that took over
Yes.
the peninsula. The only thing you hear about America is it fell it fell into, decadence and homosexuality. It's like the one thing you hear about America.
Which is
Um,
funny to me because like that's the same shit that Osama bin Laden complained about. Of course, we you have the like psyop that is his letter circulating right now.
Oh my God. Oh, basically though, like one wonders like, oh, so did America actually, if this country's criticizing it, is America cool actually? Maybe, I don't know.
Well,
Maybe
because
maybe this is a deader timeline. I don't
because
know.
like that's well, and that's the thing, right? Again, the same culture exists in that timeline that exists in ours, right?
Mhm.
So it's presumably the same cultural contexts exist, right? Joan Baez must have had a Vietnam War to protest against, right? There's a
Yeah.
there's a Springsteen, there's this or that. I mean, even you get the sense that there is not the success that the Republic of Greater East Asia pretends to. Early on, right, they have a history book that claims China as part of their ancestral homeland, but later in the book, you're like, oh yeah, there was this bootleg music that was circulating from a Chinese rocker. So presumably, there's a thriving Chinese pop culture scene that is totally independent of the Republic of Greater East Asia, right? America has lost its client state in Korea, which the Republic blames America, for that particular geopolitical fuck up of theirs. Um, I don't think it
Certainly no mention
matters.
of Europe, really. Like
None.
one wonders. I was my husband asked me this question when I was talking about the novel. Sydney said, "So if Japan won the war, did the Nazis?" And I said, "I don't think so, because like I think, but I don't know." Um, I
Yeah, I mean they
I my vision of what happened, I think, is the war just like kind of eventually Japan and the US like stalemated
mhm.
probably post the fall of like Berlin. You basically have this similar path in Europe and on in the Pacific, the US basically was like, you know what? Fuck it, we're gonna stop fighting Japan, go keep invading China, and like somehow the Soviets were able to be kept out of China. That's my best guess.
Mhm. I don't think it matters personally the
No, not
geopolitical
really.
space that Greater East Asia occupies, but what it calls to my mind as I read this book, I kept wondering, okay, is this actually an oblique satire of the United States, right?
Hmm.
There are a couple reasons for that, right? I mean, of course, you have the prevalence of school shootings in this country, right? The you have violence being just around the corner, especially if you occupy certain like socioeconomic strata, right?
Hmm.
You have this constant tension. You have this ever-present fear and and suffering that nobody really does anything about in power, right? You also have a country that, staves off its contradictions with war, right? That is constantly riling people up for the next enemy, whether it's communists or whether it's terrorists or whether it's Hamas or whoever, right?
Sure.
It's to my mind, it is very easy for a country in that sort of imperial core position to create its own reality, right? To immerse you in this game of violence where, well, if we're not doing imperialism, somebody else will, so we better do it, right? I mean,
Right.
how many people still believe that Al Qaeda had that insane mountain fortress, right?
Hmm. No, yeah. Notably, we are recording from Al Qaeda's mountain fortress right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
the fucking the dates are really really superb here.
no, we're actually recording from that you've seen the image of Saddam Hussein hiding, laying down. You know what I'm talking about? The graphic with
Why
Saddam
didn't
Hussein lying
Why
down.
didn't
We're
Saddam
there.
Hussein just like flip over and like click on the dirt below him to dig it out, right? You can do that very easily,
I'm rotating him in my mind as we speak.
Eventually you hit some coal, you hit a mine shaft so you can get some sticks from that, make some torches.
So most of the actual text is not something that we can kind of discuss at length without just doing plot summary, which is not what I'm really trying to do. It
Yeah,
is
the prose
mostly
is
just slaughter.
pretty eminently skimmable is the
It's
prose.
it's like not bad. Like don't get me wrong, like it's entertaining. It is page turning. It's just kids killing each other in increasingly horrifying ways, limbs being blown off, axes and skulls, kids jumping off of things, a lot of machine guns like tearing children's heads off. Some kids saying, let's not fight, sickles going through necks, just there's 42 kids, and I think every single death we have described to us, if I'm
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. I
Every
mean,
single one.
that's a lot of deaths. I mean, there's a part where a stomach is described as the trash bin. It is a sausage factory as it's coming out.
Yeah.
I really thought of like some of those gore movies when like that was described. There's a winking corpse because an eye was taken out. The malleability of the human body is a running theme, like how you can twist a skull and a body and a whatever. And then you have though like with this over the top violence, you also have smaller violence. You have injury. Injury is a very running thing. All these kids are just bleeding out of every orifice. Noriko in particular is dealing with this horrifying cold, maybe set in by shock. They don't know if she's infected. They're not sure what. These things are, ongoing. You have this really like messed up scene with Yumiko and Yukiko who are like set up to be important because it like gives them these like long backstories about one's a tomboy and one's girlish, both are into Shuya. It seems to be a whole thing. Yumiko's obsessive. I was like writing out their details because I was like, okay, new characters just dropped. And then I wrote in my notes, oh, they're dead now. Like fucking Machine Gun by Kazuo. Dead by
Oh yeah.
Kazuo should be repeated. Nobody knows. The only reason anyone would know this novel series, the Circle series by Ted Decker, would be because they listened to it on this podcast when I eventually make Joss read it. But there is a part where this guy, every time he shoots someone, says "boom, dead by Billos," which is his name. And I kept thinking of "boom, dead by Kazuo" because it happens so many times.
Kazuo
Um,
easily has the highest body count in this
yes.
in the story. Um,
Also, notably, Billos is some kind of stand-in for a biblical allegory. Ted Decker is a Christian horror author.
Bilos. Also, no, it's not Borat's brother. Never mind. Never mind. Ignore that.
More like Killos because he was killing people.
There you go.
Anyhow, Shinji and Yutaka. I wrote Yutaka's a clown and Shinji is epic. They're both sad about a girl Yutaka liked, and they decided they're going to kill the game master and overthrow the government. Shinji's uncle, notably, has a quote that I thought was very important to this, more important than Shinji, actually. And the quote is, I'd be dead if I was a really good person. Anyone would. He's referring to their society. I want to talk about that because Shinji is dead by Kazuo pretty swiftly, which is like kind of a rug pull because Shinji's set up as a major contender.
Oh yeah, there's 100 pages, 100 pages or so over the course of that, where it goes into great detail about, the area around the school is a forbidden zone, right? So you can't go back and fight,
Yeah,
Sakamochi and
trying
the
to figure out how
soldiers.
to drop a bomb on him and stuff.
Exactly, and that of course never transpires ultimately because Kazuo shows up and I almost said saves the day. He does the opposite.
I mean, saves the day for Sakamochi, I guess. Um, but yeah, the quote from Shinji's uncle, and Shinji's uncle is this guy who's taught him to do all these things, who was something of a rebel himself. Um, he said, I'd be dead if I was a good person. And he's talking about, that. And it comes back to this idea of like anyone who's a good person in the society speaks out, acts out, attacks, does something, tries to organize their workplace, something. And in this society, you get dropped because this is a society that has a high enough standard of living to keep people from just, not caring whether they live or die, but enough repression to keep people from trying to make their conditions better.
Oh yeah, I mean Shinji's uncle says straight. I mean he's got a fundamental distrust of groups and movements. He says they're not very reliable, which again, it's as you say, right? They exist in this environment that's very, very good at crushing any organized resistance. You get the sense that there's a lot of that brewing in individual minds, right? But on an organized level, it hasn't really reached yet.
And Takami said he was, thinking about this world. He was largely influenced by the anarchists who were defeated by the police in the big Japanese protests.
Mhm.
And he has a quote from his essay where he basically says, eventually you throw all your Molotov cocktails, which is an interesting way of putting it. And he's actually like was not dismissive of them. He was not saying, oh, those idiots. He was not saying, oh, well, what did they? He was just like, well, you throw all your Molotov cocktails and you kind of got to go home at a certain point. When you are acting as an individual or as a very small collective, you have a limited amount to work with. And this society, this successful fascist society, this theoretical successful fascist society that, may or may not, actually be possible and may or may not be as successful as it pretends to be, has kind of it from both ways. And I think that's an interesting analysis because I think of our own society, right? Obviously, we don't live in a world where, you can say one bad thing about the government and you would die. They would just have killed everyone if that was the case. That's just not, one thing about the United States is telling people they're not allowed to say things, typically backfires. We don't, as US citizens, like I was making this joke earlier, it usually is a bad thing that US citizens are told don't touch and they have to touch. But occasionally it comes through. And certain things like speech that can actually be useful on, you see how badly, some of the conservative projects backfire when they try to ban books. It's why it actually works better when there's co-option and like false narratives and capitalist media. But I'm thinking about, the concept of a society with deep repression like ours, like where there is a massive military complex, prison industrial complex, that kind of thing, not to the extent of just getting sniped all the time, but still a lot of death, and also enough of a standard of living that it's like, okay, if I go to the store, like there's going to be cereal on the shelf, there's going to be chips on the aisle, like
Right.
whether or not you
And
can afford it, that's one thing, but then the people who can't afford it, they're outside society anyway, and then the boot comes down on them.
and the ability of, people to be in proximity to a store in the first place and not to know about things like food deserts, right?
Right.
That
Right.
sort of siloing off, right? That sort of isolation that's very easy.
And if you
What
do know, like you are someone that or is more likely to feel the heavy hand of the state.
Exactly. Just by the nature of, well, what will I do about it? There's not an electoral path to this.
Mhm.
We had, there you get into organizing, and then, I mean, you see what's happening in Atlanta right now, right? The
Mhm.
mere act of, going to protest to protest the building of essentially a military base.
Mhm. I've got another quote here about the society. Quote, and this is from Shogo. Look, this country's run by a bunch of idiot bureaucrats. In fact, you have to be an idiot to be a bureaucrat. My guess is when this lovely game was first proposed, some crazy military strategist probably came up with it. There was no opposition. You don't want to stir things up by questioning the specialists, and it's terribly difficult to end something that's already been established. You interfere and you're out of a job. No worse yet, you might be sent to a forced labor camp for ideological deviation. Even if everyone were against it, no one could say it out loud. That's why nothing changes. There's a lot of screwed up things in this country, but they all boil down to the same thing. fascism, end quote. And this gets amended to some sense by Sakamochi, who's later like, oh, we don't actually care about it for military purposes. But it is fundamentally the same of like this government, by nature of being fascist, by nature of being reactionary, is set in its ways that if for some reason the game started to be seen as like, hey, this is untenable, it would be very difficult to change course because it is set in its ways, because it can only hit the kill button, which is, of course, like why fascism has such a death drive attached to it.
No, 100%, and I mean, Shogo has a very dim view indeed of the public of Greater East Asia, right? Of the public of any country that has fallen into this, right? He says here, once the system is tailor-made to fit the people of this country. In other words, their subservience to superiors, blind submission, dependence on others and group mentality, conservatism, and passive acceptance. Once they're taught something supposedly a noble cause by serving the public good, they can reassure themselves they've done something good, even if it means snitching. They can't think for themselves. Anything that's too complicated sends their heads reeling. And notably, this is where I'm not very impressed with Noriko's character up to this point, but this is where she speaks up and provides actually a counterpoint to that, right?
Yeah.
Because again, she says, "Look, this is the first time I've heard any of this, right? This is the first time I've been exposed to these ideas and the perspective of a dissident, right? But like, look, if what you've just said is true, if everybody were informed of this, I don't think they would sit still," she says. "It's because no one knows about this that we've ended up in this situation." And I lean toward Noriko in this sense, right? Because that's why the Zionist entity in Israel is losing the propaganda war, right? Because it is so nakedly brazen, the genocide that they're doing, right? That's why you get so many more. That's why people have to pay people to show up to pro-Israel rallies.
Yes. And notably, Shogo does like kind of give a little, because he does say, history comes in waves, which I joked. Shogo is a Leninist shocked emoji, like things happen. But no, yeah. Shogo also does have a briefly problematic moment where he says, well, maybe some of this is genetic.
I'm not going to lay claim to that, but
no, I'm kidding.
People do go through undialectical phases, is the point.
Shogo
right?
is like 16 and
Exactly.
and half crazed for murder. No, I'm mostly making a joke.
Yeah. But yeah, Noriko's absolutely right. The contradictions just haven't reached the point of rebellion.
There's also a clash around this time where and I do love this like little moment where Shuya is like, if I could play rock for all the people, there would be a revolution.
I love that.
And Shogo's like, dog. He knows better,
Because Shogo calls it as a release valve, right?
Yes.
And indeed, in the very next chapter, one of the girls has a locket from a pop group that is allowed.
Yeah.
So there are those outlets.
I thought
right?
she was going to be a player because she's like listening to a pop idol and like being told what to do, which is kind of an interesting. There's a few characters with like interesting quirks that like die pretty quickly.
It's funny to me, and this is neither here nor there, that at the beginning of chapter 34, right, they're talking about baseball, and it mentions, baseball is popular here, but it's also like a big American sport, and if they lose to America, the Olympics, then the baseball federation directors have to commit ritual suicide if they lose.
Oh man.
That's sort of again, who knows if it's true in Greater East Asia, but it's the same sort of like racist trope that you hear about North Korea at the World Cup. By the way, North Korea won the Women's World Cup a few years ago.
It's true. I'm trying to think of like some scenes that need to be mentioned. There's a scene where like there's gendered violence throughout this. The most notable one is a scene with Kazushi, who threatens this girl Takako, basically.
Yes, the guy who's very good at making excuses.
The guy who's good at making excuses. He makes it makes an interesting point in that scene where she says, well, he's always been a little forward, but I didn't think he could be like this, which it makes the point of like kind of the old saying of like, when you put pressure on a tube of toothpaste, you see what's inside. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. And then this game in general is like that. The people have pressure on them and then you see what they're made of, really. But you also have an interesting moment in that scene where she kills him unbelievably gruesomely. And it's like, of course it's a justified scene because she is being sexually assaulted. She's like going to get raped and killed. But then she kills him dramatically. And the audience has to walk a line between good riddance and holy shit, a 15-year-old just died,
Hmm.
a horrible 15-year-old, and you are then, brought into this game, kind of. I think of this scene maybe more than any other scene, except maybe towards the end, is like you are brought into this, kill this 15-year-old, kill this 15, and then you realize, oh wow, I'm still chanting for the death of a 15-year-old.
Hmm.
Um, a 15-year-old who is doing something horrible. It is it's what the game forces you to do, even as an observer. And then doesn't matter regardless, because Mitsuko drops her anyway immediately afterwards. Because Mitsuko. Also, Mitsuko has a scene where she says, I was always into you. I'm a bit of a dyke, I think, and then fucking kills her. Weird scene, never comes back around. Not sure if that's just supposed to be like Mitsuko being like oversexed or what the deal with that is. There's like
There's a little
that
bit of that.
there's like that in another scene with this guy Show who's like gay and then like gets blown up. It's kind of funny. Not really important. Queerness isn't like really central to this, but those are the two like mentions of gayness in the book.
It's very
Neither here nor there.
it's very like mid 90s like tokenization.
Hmm.
It reads as, I
Show being
think.
obsessed with his appearance and being like, damn, I am hot. And then another
Mhm.
person's perspective, like, Show, he's like that ugly guy that hangs around, right? I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, and the way I mean, and the way he's illustrated in the manga as well, just like grotesquely pretty, right, with the
Yeah.
pompadour and everything. It's just unpleasant to look at.
Mm.
But I mean, the way the film has the way the film has Takako killing Kazushi Nida, right? It's as you say, it's very over the top. Like it's very there's a certain sort of buy-in that you have with it. Like she gives, a big old war cry and fucking stabs him in the dick, right? There's a catharsis inherent in it. Um
Hmm.
and again, it's because it's as you say, Kazushi Nida, I have the note here. Kazushi Nida is Kazuo Kiriyama but dumb, right?
Hmm.
He's effortless in grades and extracurriculars. Maybe he's not Kazuo but dumb, but he's certainly a version of Kazuo that everybody likes and accepts, right? And in a similar vein, it's we'll get into Death Note eventually on the show, but I read into these characters something similar that I read into Light Yagami, right? You can be a total whack job, you can be an asshole, you can be a sexual predator, and still rise to the top of this particular society.
Yeah, like no, I just like want to read this bit to like explain like what's going on here. Like it literally, she stomps on his crotch and then it says, her mouth was breaking into the grin. She wasn't angry anymore. She was enjoying this. So what? She never claimed to be Pope John Paul II or the 13th Dalai Lama. On her knees now, she thrust the ice pick into his mouth. She saw several cavity fillings. His arms that were struggling to pull out her leg froze. Takako pushed further. It sunk into his throat without much resistance. Kazushi's entire body from his chest to his toes then went into convulsions as if swimming in the submariner. Then it stopped. The albino eyes remained open, surrounded by a spider's web pattern of gooey blood like running paint. Like, it's horrifying. And also, he just did something horrible. So you are forced to walk this. It's like if anything about this book is impressive, it is its ability to walk the line of gore and horror about the gore and like both be true at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, Poorly executed in most fiction, and I think it just works here.
Yeah, and there's a certain earnestness about it as well, because you have Takako staggering off from the scene of this fight, and she runs into, greatest quarterstaff warrior Hiroki Sugimura
Let's
at this
fucking
point.
go.
And as it happens, there was this rumor that they were going out. They weren't ever going out, but they were best friends, right? And they were just, they're best friends. They really like each other. They really relate to each other. And um I mean, there's an earnestness about Takako dying in his arms, right? One of the last things that they say to each other are, you've become quite a stud, Hiroki says, and you're the most styling girl in the world. It's
Mm.
goofy, but it's charming. It's honest,
And they're
right? And
15,
yeah,
like
you're really
14 and
rooting for
15.
him. Hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, and it's quite like that. There are a lot of like little moments that like remind you of their like humanness that do work, despite like, the nature of some of these characters. Like I know I already mentioned how he dies, but like another scene with Kinji that I think is notable. where like his final battle against Kazuo that also illustrates this is like while he's fighting, the submachine gun is like rattling and he like gets hit with a bullet in the finger. And because he's so much adrenaline, he thinks, guess I won't make starting lineup. Like he has little thoughts like this, and he's like running and swerving and this and that.
Oda does as well, the rich kid. Like, he gets his finger blasted off and he's like, shit, now I'll never play, violin.
No, he actually has the thought that I'll have to play violin with the paralyzed people, and everyone will be impressed that I can play the violin because I'm paralyzed. That's bullshit. And then
Mhm.
it throws out Kazuo killed him. Kazuo played violin in his room by himself one time and was better than him, and then threw it away. But like that scene with Shinji is also notable because it reminds me a lot of like when I used to wrestle, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the nature of like what a fight is like when it's prolonged, to some extent, right? Like not like something that's instantaneous, but something that's ongoing. You're running, you're doing this and that. And wrestling, this thing, they go on for about 8 minutes. You would have these like, I would have, and of course it's not like life or death, but I would have these like flashes of very random thoughts like that just
Yes.
you can't escape. Like you're just gonna have. Um, just little things you notice. A guy like standing off to the side with a pink shirt, and you like have some association between it and another thing, or like
Yes.
an itch that you notice that like goes through your head and reminds you of like another like. And they're disjointed, and it's just how your brain works. This book does that quite well, but it also like centers them as these like 14, 15-year olds having these thoughts.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. No, it's something that I once you notice it, you don't stop noticing it, right? There's
mhm,
this moment of trauma, there's this moment of action, there's this moment where you have to make a split decision, and in that moment, yeah, you focus on something that would otherwise be totally irrelevant, right?
mhm,
It's the fucking it's the cavity fillings, right?
right.
In Kazushi's mouth, right? When Takako is going to town on him with the ice pick. It's
Mhm.
just something that sticks in your head to tack your psyche onto something that makes sense. So Shuya has a 100-meter dash in just under 11 seconds, which is impressive to me.
That's pretty insane, yeah. Being shot and stuff, and then just being like, yeah, casually doing that. There's a lot of
Yes.
great feats in this book.
Speaking
Um,
of details that jump out to me, yeah.
you know, um, I know we're glossing over Shuya at a certain point ends up getting separated from the others.
Oh
Winds up at
boy.
a lighthouse, and probably one of the most engaging, not probably one of the most engaging scenes in the book. He winds up in a lighthouse helped out by Yuki, who's like their class representative.
It is
Um,
it is strange to me, and sorry I interrupted you,
no, you're
but
fine.
just before we go on, he has this dream before he wakes up in the lighthouse, right? And it's like, okay, he's in class or whatever, and everything's normal, but then he sees the students who have died, and they've died as we saw them die, even if he himself hasn't come across their bodies, right? Okay, Tatsumichi Oki has his face split in half. Shuyo's there for that. Shuya did that, right? But you also have like Sakura Ogawa with her neck broken. You have this, that, or the other person with I think Sho Tsukioka has his like head exploded because he was
Yeah.
caught in the forbidden zone. It's stuff that Shuya wouldn't have been privy to. Nonetheless, he sees it in the dream. I don't read anything into that, but it just is weird to me.
Sure. And he's like recovering from this battle with Kazuo, and notably you have this moment where like Yuki she's like has a massive crush on him, and it turns out like 90% of the girls do because
I
like
was keeping in my notes like a Shuya crush count.
the thing about Shuya is he's an athlete, he's down to earth, he's funny, and he plays rock. Like what's not to like? And he's a bit of a rebel. It's hard not to like Shuya. Um
I like Shuya.
yeah, don't we all? Um but the gang has Yuko, who like had seen Shuya do violence in self-defense, and so she's very afraid. So as there's stew being brought to Shuya, Yuko's like, I'm gonna put some poison in here to hide. And then one of the girls is like, I'm gonna taste this just to make sure it's boom, she dies. Girls put guns on each other, just machine gunning each other, blood on the floor, just this horrifying scene of violence. Um, ending in fucking Yuko running upstairs, being upset, and then falling off the lighthouse to her death.
Yeah, and like this is one part I think where the film falls down. Like I think the film is better than the book in a lot of ways, but the film falls down here, and kind of does Yuko dirty because the context you don't get in the movie that you do get in the book is that Yuko comes from an abusive household, right?
Yeah.
Yuko comes from an abusive household, and what was it? Like her father died accidentally, but ultimately it was, I mean, it freed her family from the horrific
Yeah.
abuse that he visited on them. So she has this childhood trauma where if anybody in her vicinity engages in some form of violence, there is malice behind it, there is evil behind it, and like she is very, very, I mean, not without reason, right?
Right.
Very, very suspicious of such a person. So she comes from an abusive household, and she witnesses at the beginning of the book Shuya killing Tatsumichi Oki, right? Of course,
Yeah.
she doesn't have the context for what happens, but for all she knows, Shuya is a fucking axe murderer. Now Yuki Utsumi has brought him into the lighthouse and is healing him. And, again, Yuko comes from this household, and what she's told by one of the other girls holding up in the lighthouse with her is, don't provoke him.
Mm-hmm.
You tell somebody from that background, don't provoke him. What do you expect her to think?
Mm-hmm. And then it leads to this violence that kills all of these girls who were like, we will do no violence, we will hurt no one, we will hole up in the lighthouse. We are the good little squad led by the class representative who's just a little cheeky but funny and nice. And they all die and they kill each other. They are not killed by Kazuo. He would have killed them had
Oh,
he got an
100%.
opportunity. But and then Shuya is just kind of standing in the ashes of this, just like, well. And notably, Shuya and Shogo and Noriko, like they want to escape this island, and like Shuya keeps being like, "We're gonna build our team of people to escape." And every time he finds his team, something happens to them. They have to leave. They have to disappear. They fucking die.
I,
Or
and I tell you what, like, talk about your confusion over names. Like, there's three girls in the lighthouse whose names are Yuko, Yuka, and Yukie, right?
yeah.
There's more Yukes than a game of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles.
Not to mention like Shuya and Shogo being like back to back over and over. Like it's not to mention just a lot of names in general. It's
Oh yeah.
there are some challenges here with that. It definitely, especially with how skimmable this text is at times, it can be like, wait, what character is this? I kind of blanked out for a
Well,
second.
but at the same time, it keeps it fresh, right? This is my third time reading this book, right? The first time was in high school, the second time was in college, and now.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
you
no,
come to
it's
it,
fine
and there's
though. Yeah.
there's elements of it that are new every time.
Yeah. Um, Shortly after this, you get some Shogo lore. He lost his GF in the last game. Very sad. And he plans basically to, once he gets off the island, to do suicide by cop, basically. Like he says, "Oh, I'm gonna attack the state." He knows what he does is not going to disrupt it. He has no plans to do anything that's going to do any more than be an inconvenience. He just wants to basically strike out at whoever he can strike out against. He's like, yeah, y'all should, if you get off of here, like run away. I have nothing. I have no one. I have no father. I once wanted to be a doctor, but like I fuck that noise. I'm just gonna like, yeah, go do suicide by cop. That's you kind of learn that. It's sort of something I had kind of guessed already at that point. Obviously he hates the state and sees that as something that cannot be dislodged. He says history comes in waves, so maybe at some point, but he has this idea of like, yeah, maybe we'll like strike out against it. Not in like some way of like Lenin in 1905 saying if we're defeated, it'll be in a way that fundamentally changes the balance of no, he just means like I want to like make the people quake a little before I get turned into like pudding. That's
Mhm.
kind of, or before I get put back on this thing for a third time,
Oh yeah, because when you come from a background that's like, movements, groups of people are, fundamentally like not trustworthy, like you're disconnected from any sort of political project. What do you have except your individual impact?
You have some of the major players dying off. You have Hiroki, in his grand battle against Kazuo.
Yeah,
A great standoff where Hiroki is actually like able to challenge him, but you
he makes
know,
Kazuo give ground. Yeah,
yeah, doesn't end up working out. You have Mitsuko, she has her moment where she's like seducing the guy that's into anime. And then, shortly after goes down to Kazuo. You have like this pretty horrible moment with her dying. Like, well, at what point in my life was I ruined? Oh, I was chipped away bit by bit as I was like sexually assaulted over and over and shit.
Oh God,
Pretty
yeah.
terrible, but she dies nonetheless, not redeemed or anything. There's no redemption in her death. She does not do a good thing when she dies. She just
Mhm.
passes, and that violence is, it just bleeds out into the dirt. Like there's no other way to put it.
Again,
Um,
like the guilty one is he who casts the shadow, right?
right.
And Mitsuko never left that fucking shadow.
That's exactly right. Um, until it ends up of, the confrontation we kind of always knew was coming, Kazuo versus the trio. And you have this just very prolonged, come on, pretty fucking fun scene of him chasing around with a machine gun and shit.
The last student that dies before it's just the four of them, right? Shuya, Noriko, Shogo, and Kazuo is Mizuho Inada. And she's got this like Chunibyo thing going on where she lives in this fantasy world where
Oh
like
yeah.
where the god of light Ahura Mazda has given her this like special like mission from
From
like
Zoroastrianism, notably.
yeah, it's weird, like it's this thing of okay, like you've read this like foreign sort of I was into fucking like Greek mythology when I was like
Mm.
12, right? Everybody goes through this phase of like, oh, you read this mythology and you get really into it, right? And you have these fantasies about it. Some people grow out of that quicker than others.
Famously, C.S. Lewis, famous fantasy author and Christian theologian, said if he wasn't a Christian, he would be a Zoroastrian.
Let's
So,
go.
make of that what you will. He called it, quote, the second manliest religion, which is such a, maybe we'll get into that at some point.
We should.
Very
We should.
odd. Also, his analysis of British Christianity as the manliest religion, I would have some qualms with that, but well, um, that aside, we have the final battle. It's a gun chase that like turns into like there's a wire trap. There's cars chasing each other. At this point they've collected the weapons of like everyone, so they all have like unlimited ammunition. It's the end of the video game, and you have all your power-ups, and you're using fucking all of them. Shotguns and machine guns, and eventually, Kazuo gets just lit up, but he's not down yet. He's got the greatest body armor of all time and is surviving, and he sits up. And who is it who gets the shot that really downs Kazuo? It's Noriko. She drops
Mhm.
him. Now, notably, Shogo does this like sort of noble thing where he runs up really quickly and shoots Kazuo, and he's like, "I'm the one who killed him. You don't have to feel guilty. I'm the one who killed him." Like he does that, but like Noriko dropped Kazuo. Like
Mhm.
Noriko is the one who ultimately defeated this undefeatable like super being, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And I early on, like until that like turning point that we mentioned about a third of the way through the book, right, where they talk politics, right? I wasn't really impressed with Noriko. Like I thought, okay, her personality is girl,
Yeah,
right?
her personality is like shy girl, like stereotype, you know.
But you have to have that, that the faith that somebody who wins the game by not playing, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who has unshakable faith in their friends that they've found family of theirs, somebody who wants the world to be a kinder and gentler place, and not to give in to the zero sum brutality that is constructed around her, right? Somebody like that can kill a homicidal whack job, right? Who is only doing this because he thinks it's a fun idea, who has
Mm.
indeed lucked into it by the flip of a coin, that you know that murderous force of nature can fall to a purer, simpler soul, as Ruby puts it. There is that sort of stylistic break, right? Because of course, you have X amount of students remaining at the end of every single chapter. Now that we mentioned that,
Hmm.
but that goes away after the game ends. After Shogo says, "Oh yeah, like now that we've beaten Kazuo, I'm gonna kill you, Shuya, and you, Noriko, because I
Yeah.
was all along I was wheeling you into my like spider's web trap to
Hmm.
shoot you both."
So true.
Um, and then he's on the ship off the island. He's talking to Sakamochi about what all went down. Sakamochi reveals, "Oh yeah, I know that you hacked the government because this, that, and the other." Um, as it turns out, Shogo was putting on a show. They were all putting on a show
A
because,
show, yo.
indeed,
Hmm.
the Shogo figured out that the battle royale collars could actually be deactivated with proper knowledge of
Hmm.
electronics, which of course he has because Shogo has knowledge of everything.
Yeah.
Neither
He
here nor
read
there.
books. He read books in his hospital bed. It explains
Yes,
everything.
exactly. You know, a lot of time after surviving the thing. But yeah, so they disable the collars A, and they figure out also that there are mics in the collars B, so the government can listen in like whenever, right? This is something also that Shinji figures out while he's trying to hack the government and trying to build his bomb. And
Hmm.
so from then on, it's funny, like in the film, like Shinji points this out and then they just kind of ignore it for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, the point is there is this ongoing surveillance that Shogo has figured out how to circumvent. And so he is like, okay, I'm gonna make like I'm shooting you guys, and then you can sneak on the boat at night because it's nighttime and it'll be easy, and then we will overpower Sakamochi and company. And they do. They
And
do.
notably, the way he kills Sakamochi is pretty cool. He kills him with the pencil that at the beginning he made them all write, "I will kill my classmates" with.
I'm gonna make this pencil disappear.
Literally, Joker. I was earlier going to make a joke about like Kazuo being the Joker. But in this moment, he becomes the Joker. I'm going to become Kazuo. Yeah,
We
no.
are all the Joker on this blessed day.
Yeah, and he kills this man who very much deserves to die. And then, and as well as everybody else, all the other bad guys on the boat, and they sail away. And then, as kind of is like, I don't know if it's necessary or not, but Shogo, succumbs to his wounds and dies. I was gonna say I don't know if it's necessary because I said it like as necessitated by his like character. I was gonna say, but like it feels a little that way, doesn't it? It feels a little as necessitated by like everything. Like it
Mhm.
feels like if his wounds didn't kill him, then the like book itself would. Like he just has to die here, and I don't know why, but I just felt like he was going to. I
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know.
because this is the first indication in the chapter that like there's anything fucking wrong with him. Um, and again, the movie plays it the same way, right? They're on the boat getting out, and he's like, "Oh, I'm actually not feeling so hot," and then he dies,
Mhm.
right? But that's the thing, right?
He got what he
He
wanted. He
he
got
got what
suicide by, well, he got to strike against the state.
yeah, he got everything that he wanted, essentially. Everything crucially that he believed himself to be capable of at this stage, and he passes on his dissidence energy, right? His will to go on surviving to Shuya and Noriko, right?
Yeah.
It's
Shuyo promises to tear down the state, and Noriko's like, I'm right there with you. Like,
yeah,
they become Lenin and Krupskaya in this moment. Like,
fuck yeah.
it's sort of, but they really like Bruce Springsteen.
Do you think Lennon would have liked Bruce Springsteen?
I don't really know what Lennon's like personal tastes were. He did I know the only thing about Lennon I know related to music is he called music he didn't like Philistine a lot.
Hmm.
So it would have been good or Philistine, I suppose. My man had a one-track mind. We'll say that.
Hmm.
No offense. No offense to Lennon or Krupskaya, both pretty dope people. But this Lennon guy, have you heard of him?
Yeah. No,
Huh.
he wrote a few books. He did some cool things.
Yeah, a thing or two.
Yeah.
Um, that's the guy with the cat, right? Yeah, he's got the I'm right behind me, there's a picture of Lennon holding a cat. So should okay. So yeah, the book concludes with two players remaining, it says, but it's like the eternal game. Why? Because they are on the run. Basically, the government has put out like a find these troublemakers kind of call. In the last line in it is now once again two students remaining, but of course they're part of you now, it says.
Hmm.
And it literally quotes the Bruce Springsteen song. It says we're born to run. They're taking off. Shuya is carrying his Beretta. Like he's like a revolutionary, and like it's supposed to end there. There's not a sequel. There is a forced movie sequel where they make a battle royale where children are sent to kill Shuya, which is kind of funny.
There's a
Apparently.
scene, yeah, there's a scene toward the end of Battle Royale 2 Requiem, right, where Shuya is talking to all the children of the world, and he tells all the children in all the countries that the United States has bombed to rise up in rebellion, right? Yeah, Afghanistan, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Somalia, like everywhere, right?
Interesting. I like that, even though I hear it's not a particularly great movie.
Yeah.
That sounds fun though.
Mhm.
Um, Regardless, this ending is, it ends not with them going to America. They're very much still in Japan. They are, running from the government. They are actively rebelling. They are hand in hand. They
They
are,
they have
you
a
know,
like doctor contact that can like get them out of the country and patch up their wounds.
yeah. And you still have Shuya like kind of being himself. Like he's not gone insane like the girl's shown at the beginning of the thing, like who survived the battle royale. Like he's still doing his music, he's still doing all that stuff. It reads, I'll love you with all the madness in my soul someday, girl. I don't know when we're gonna get to that place where we really want to go. And when we'll walk in the sun, but till then, tramps like us, baby, we were born to run, and run they will, and they are with us now. And it says, and they won't stop until we win. Um, and it's not the crab cannery ship ending in the same way, like, oh, well, this is an active revolution and this is what we're gonna do, and so on and so forth. But there is like a kind of mirror in the idea of like we're gonna keep on doing this thing until we win. This thing is
Right.
going to continue. And I thought it was not intentional, but like I noted there's like a weird, or interesting like rhyme there in that ending of like we're gonna keep going until we beat this thing.
Oh yeah.
And there's not much prescription of how. It's just kind of spirit, I suppose. But the spirit of Shuya and Noriko is now apparently with me because I finished reading the book and the author has passed it on to me. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, Shogo, about a quarter of the way through the book, right, he says, loving someone always requires you to not love others, right?
Mm,
And, you have to have love, you have to have compassion, you have to have a burning desire to create a better world for, you and your community. And you have to have the desire, crucially, to build a community,
yeah.
right, in order to prosecute any kind of revolutionary project, right? And that's as orthogonal, I think, or disconnected from politics as a lot of this book is. I
Hmm.
think this sets you down that sort of road, right? You can't read this and think of you can't read this and come away a misanthrope. I mean, I don't read this and come away a
Right.
misanthrope. I don't speak for everybody, but I
Right.
mean,
People compare this to Lord of the Flies, right?
mhm.
And obviously there is a pretty clear connection, but there is a difference in this and Lord of the Flies very significantly in that like and it frustrated me like every single review I read, it was like the Lord of the Flies for the 21st century. It's like, no, it isn't, because these children are forced to kill each other, right? These
Mhm.
children, by and large, with a few bad actors, do not want to kill each other. The selfishness is forced. It is societal. If there is an analogy here, it is to a broader society that forces unwarranted competition, and that
Yes.
when people try to rise up, unless they're hyper competent in rising up and hyper disciplined and willing to make sacrifices, they get cut down. You have girls who stand up and say, let's not fight, and they get cut down immediately. And the people who are the revolutionaries, be that what it is, have to be smart and have to be disciplined, and they have to be willing to fight back against counter revolutionaries, and they have to be willing to, go through hell to carry out their potential revolution. If there is any analogy, it is to that. I don't think this book is fundamentally nihilistic about human nature. I mean, if it was, then 95% of the kids would be, Kai, would be Kazuo, and versus, the very small number of the kids being Kazuo, and Kazuo and has to be explained away with a medical condition, and Mitsuko has a explanation of like her like horrifying like trauma that she's gone through. I kind of disagree with a reading that I've like saw over and over on this book about it being like fundamentally anti-human or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's you have to have experienced hell or indeed be essentially predestined by freak accidents to be a Kazuo, to be a Mitsuko, right? You have to be indeed, like coddled by this environment that rewards very superficial accomplishments and doesn't really prosecute your individual sins, right? Your abuses, right? To be a Kazushi Nida, right? There is a long series of accidents and crime and abuse and failure that produces murderers, right?
Mm. And of course, in this, the government is the biggest murderer of all, but it's the one that casts the shadow, but it's this institutionalized violence that it is implied that there is no answer, like there's no answer to fight against. It seems as set as the rising and setting of the sun, but it's said at the end, like, no, we are going to beat this thing. Now, this is not proletarian literature like the Crab Cannery Ship. It does not give you a recipe for how. I have no clue in hell what Shuya is going to do next, except run his ass off and then hopefully, figure something out, return with an army from America because America has had a socialist revolution. I don't know. I don't know what's happened in this world, but I do know Leninism with Bruce Springsteen characteristics, of course, has taken over.
Bruce Springsteen is the general secretary of whatever Communist Party rules the United
Yeah.
States.
Bruce Springsteen notably had that brief running podcast series with Obama. Very weird crossover.
What?
Yeah, no, look it up. It was like one of those weird 2020 limited run podcasts that like shouldn't exist. Not just because that doesn't make it, not just because it's bad, because it doesn't make sense.
Obama's dropping like insipid specials left and right.
Yeah, also Bruce Springsteen majorly sold out from like his anti-war days, but that is neither here nor there. Well, as we're walking away from this book, the main thing I'll say is it turns the pages really damn well. It is just a book that is very easy to read, despite it's pretty long. It's good. I think it's a good book. I'm not walking away from this like this is a masterwork. I don't feel like I've learned a lot. I don't think I'm not sitting here like, damn, the nature of man. Like I'm not having these like moments. And despite how visceral it is, there's no moments near that get me in the stomach like the Crab Cannery Ship. But I will say, if you're looking for, a book that is fun, pretty quick as far as a long book goes, and deeply, deeply violent, you could do a whole hell of a lot worse than Battle Royale. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have the spectacle, right? That is
Yes.
alluded to the very beginning with our wrestling fan, right? You have characters that are there and are gone, and for their brief flashes are wild and distinctive and memorable in their way. You have something deeper that you can read into it if you like, as we have attempted to. You have a sort of like database, right? Of okay, this character was paired with that weapon, and what if they were matched up against this other character, right? Who wins in a fight? It appeals to a lot of elements of what people look for in one or another type of story. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Admittedly, you got to stomach the gore, but I mean, you can honestly skim through the worst of it and still not lose a whole lot. It brings a lot of stuff to the table for a lot of people. And indeed, my third time reading it, I'm coming away with it with a you read it the first time in high school, and you have different heroes and different. I mean, you have the same heroes certainly, but you sort of understand where people are and what they come from. I mean, except of course for Kazushi, I think he's really universally bad.
I was gonna say, childhood is idolizing Shuya. Adulthood is realizing Kazuo makes more sense. Like one of those dark memes, and then everyone's like, "Just what? No." Yeah, no.
Like Kazuo
I know that's not what you
Kiriyama,
mean.
Kazuo Kiriyama in fucking like Joker makeup, just dancing down the stairs.
Yeah, he's like, I
But
flipped
yeah.
the coin. He's more Anton Chigurh, honestly, with the coin flip.
Yeah, you know what? We should do Old Country, No Country.
We would have to get Drew back on for that one.
Yes,
Yeah,
100%. But yeah, it brings a lot of things to the table for a lot of people, and indeed it leaves a very an indelible cultural legacy, right? You play PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, that's Battle Royale. You play Warzone, that's Battle Royale, right? Fucking like Age of Empires 2 has a Battle Royale mode now. It's you drop a whole bunch of people in a limited space, a shrinking space perhaps, and you have them fight over dwindling resources. There's an inherent intriguing element of that.
Absolutely. Well, Joss, I enjoyed this one. Do you have any final thoughts before we give the details on next week, and then I have my excellent send-off that I have prepared.
You know what? Sometimes you just have to sort of drink in the moment and then just like regurgitate whatever your mind gives you. And such a moment comes late in the book when Shuya stumbles across the corpses of a couple of his classmates, and there's birds feeding on them. And he thinks to himself, man, birds suck.
That's true. Birds do suck. Well, folks, next week we are going to do a really short one. If you cannot read this story by next week, then that's okay, because we will literally read the entire thing on the podcast. It is that short. It is Albert Camus' Myth of Sisyphus. You can read it if you want to before, or you can wait. We will literally read the whole thing on the podcast. Like I said, it is very short, but we are going to get into absurdism, and you're going to learn a lot about high school Jacob. and what I thought was deep.
And almost high school Joss, because I think I was like the one person in my graduating class who didn't read Camus. Everybody else read The Stranger.
I thought it was so deep, but I'll get into it next week. But signing off, I just have this final thought. Number 1 victory royale. Yeah, Fortnite, we like to get down. Get down. Number 1 on the board right now. Just wiped out Tomato Town. Joss has begun to floss, and cue the music.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.